Welcome, Cosmic Seekers, to our first episode of the Cosmic Hour. I'm Astro Krys, and I'm here with my fabulous co host, Emma.
Hi, Chris. So I'm really excited for our first episode of the Cosmic Hour podcast. I think we picked a really interesting topic for our first episode, and it's Formula 1 racing through the lens of astrology.
Yeah, I'm super excited for it too, especially because we're in Mars and Scorpio season. So I thought it was perfect that we chose this topic about Mars and his expression through sports because that's what Mars pretty much rules. So I'm excited to talk about Formula One as well. I became a fan in the research process of putting this podcast together. Um, so yeah, I can't wait to dive deep into this. So let's get started with just quickly going through a overview of what Mars in Scorpio represents. Now, Mars rules the sign of Scorpio. He's an ancient ruler. So I still use both ancient and modern rulerships. It just makes more sense to me. I feel like the modern rulerships just bring in more depth, but no matter what, Mars was the traditional ruler of Scorpio. So there is an expression of Mars that's very, very connected to the sign of Scorpio. Now, in this archetype, Mars is different because it's much more strategizing and executes with a plan, and also the way that it expresses itself. It's more not necessarily patient, but within the strategy, there is some type of waiting, just like the scorpion, how it doesn't really attack. It's not a real violent animal. However, if it feels threatened, it will attack you. So it's the same type of energy. All the Scorpio type of expressions are expressions where they're pretty much a force to be reckoned, but they also will not express that unless provoked. So, anything that you would like to share additionally about Mars in the archetype of Scorpio?
Yeah, so for Mars in Scorpio compared to a Mars in Aries, for example, I think there's a sort of determination that comes with the Scorpio energy versus the Aries is more quick and fast. With Mars in Scorpio, we see the persistence to follow through, and that has to do with the fixed energy of Scorpio versus the quick and fast energy of Aries.
Absolutely. And this is why Mars in Scorpio is so strong in sports. So, let's look at the ingression chart. This is when Mars went into the sign of Scorpio, October 11th of 2023. I'm not going to focus too much on it, but I did want to bring it up because this is how Mars is going to be expressing during this season. Um, Mars doesn't visit every single zodiac sign in one year because he takes about 2 years and a few months to transit all the zodiac signs. So some years we have Mars transiting through the sign of Scorpio, and so it's pretty much every other year that Mars will transit Scorpio. So that's why it's special because it rules Scorpio. The same thing when Mars transit Aries, it rules Aries, but we don't really get both of those transits in one year. Sometimes we may get the tail end, but not all the time. So when Mars is in a sign that it rules, it assists us with taking action, with completing our endeavors, and then it brings in that determination, just like Emma said. So we're much more driven to complete tasks, to execute new ideas, projects, or be more daring in our expression. I mean, this is a time that if you'd like to apply for a new job, your job hunting, right? That's another Mars word, hunting. You can then attain a job much more quicker because you'll have just that much more vitality to follow through, to continue, even if you get a no, or you don't see prospects right away, like anything coming into fruition. Mars will give you that incentive to keep going until you manifest something. So um, in this chart, we see that Mars is in the sixth house of work. I'm not going to focus too much on the houses because this shifts for everyone depending on where you're at in the world. So I'm going to look at the signs that it's making, and I'm sorry, the aspects that it's making. And one of them was a exact trine to Saturn. And this is especially auspicious because Saturn and Mars are the malefics of astrology. And when you have the two bad guys in harmonious flow, that means that the season is going to be that much better. And they're also in water signs. So even their energy is much more softer than being in a different sign, like a fire sign where they can burn things down. In water, it's all about regenerating and connecting really to our inner core and emotions. So I loved that I saw Mars playing good with Saturn. Another aspect that I wanted to bring up is the sextile that it makes to Venus, because Venus is in during this time was in Virgo, and it's making a sextile, and that's also very supportive because that is one of the benefics, and it's also about to make a opposition to Jupiter, but Venus is actually playing nice with Jupiter. So we have the benefics playing nice and we have the malefics playing nice. And then we just have Mars and Jupiter kind of exaggerating things, which, makes the season interesting. Another thing I wanted to mention is, so I have this picture of the chariot because when prepping for Formula 1 and just like grabbing all these charts that we're going to go over, I got this download that Formula 1 racing is like the ancient chariot racing back then. Now, back then, in the Roman times, I mean, there was colosseums built on this. Sport was such a big thing. Energetically, when we have individuals participating in a sport as a team together, they're generating energy. So the vibration of that team goes up. The energy in the stadium also is fueled by the audience. So when you combine all this together, there's players manifesting a game, there's the audience watching, and you just have this high vibration energy. And that's the same thing that's happening now with Formula 1 race. It's still the same concept, but it's changed. So now instead of having dangerous chariots on horses, we're having fast cars, and there's still a person in that car. So AI hasn't taken over this sport completely, but there's still someone in there navigating it. And I just thought it was very interesting because back in the days, Mars and Athena were the gods that the sportsmen would pray to, so they can end up, triumphing over their competitors. So thought that was kind of cool to put that in there. Now let's move on to the next slide, where these few slides, we're not going to spend too much time on them, and you can do your own research if you feel called to do. But I did want to bring them up because they kind of make sense, that we notice like a few little patterns that are kind of repeating in the current charts of Formula 1 right now. So the first one that I noticed was that there was a Mars Cazimi, and this is when Mars conjuncts the sun, and Mars is exalted in the sign of Capricorn. So although it does not rule this sign, it's still in very good dignity, and it's a Cazimi in the sign of Capricorn. And this is the day that they announced that they're going to put this organization together. Now, we don't have the time. I kind of guesstimated the time and figured it's going to be something that was decided maybe early, like business hours, around that, around that time. So I guessed that time, but we can adjust it. So we're going to only focus on the aspects versus the house placements, because it's not completely accurate. But I just thought it was very interesting to see this Cazimi play out. Another thing is there was Jupiter and Venus in the sign of Scorpio, and they're in conjunction. So they're actually harmoniously aligned, they're merging as one. So I thought that to be interesting as well. And then the moon was in Aries, which is also a Mars ruled sign. So we have the rulers of um, the moon and technically the sun at this point. Saturn rules Capricorn, so it's a ruler of the sun in this chart, but they're actually in mutual reception. So Saturn rules Capricorn, the sun rules Leo. So I just thought that was interesting. Now, the next chart is the Formula 1 race. So this is the official time that they race, like the first race ever. There's a few dates out there, but this is the one that was more consistent that kept on coming up. So this is the one that I chose to display. And now we still see moon in a Mars sign. So this is moon in Scorpio, the day that they raced. Mars and Venus were together. And then we have the sun in Virgo on the first race. The Saturn's still in the sign of Leo. So this just kind of shows how the progression of when they started this official new race. And what I see consistently, and this time is actually accurate, is that Mars plays a big role in when the races are starting. So Mars is very dominant and prominent in the charts. Now, going into the next chart, this is the Las Vegas chart, and this is the city chart. This is accurate as well. I got this from the time in which they incorporated, and Vegas is a Leo rising city. It's also a sun in Taurus and a moon in Libra. So it's very suiting. This chart's very suiting for Las Vegas, even the verbiage, like a fabulous welcome to fabulous Las Vegas. That is a word attributed to the energy of Leo and also to Libra. I feel like Libra are also fabulous, but they consider maybe themselves more beautiful than fabulous. Leo for sure is the the winner of that word fabulous because they're always looking fabulous. But what I want to focus on is the energy coming from the Taurus house because Las Vegas has Mars in Scorpio naturally already as a signature in their chart. And the Taurus sun and Jupiter make an opposition to Mars. So it's always, triggering that balance, that axis, the home and the 10th house axis is being triggered by this Mars all the time. Now, them having Mars in the sign of Scorpio is very significant because the Formula 1 race that is happening this year is with Mars in Scorpio. So that means that they're having a Mars return and it's pretty much triggering this opposition that Mars in the natal chart has to Jupiter, the planet of abundance, and to the sun, which the sun is going to represent the essence of the city either way, the energy that the city carries and how successful the city is. Because in a personal chart, the sun represents our career. So it's going to be similar to a mundane or city chart. It's going to represent how fruitful the city is. There's some cities that are way more successful than others. And we know that Las Vegas generates a ton of money and it does it through speculation, and that is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter and the energy of Leo actually rule speculation. So it's not a surprise that the sun is in the sign of money, which is Taurus. And we have Jupiter expanding that, bringing in foreign people from all sorts of places, and it being in the sign of Leo, where there's also a lot of entertainers. And the moon represents home, and it's also home for a lot of music artists, established ones. Up and coming artists are not something that get pretty much established in Las Vegas or like hosted in Las Vegas. It targets more of the seasoned artist that has made a name for themselves, and um they're, this like luxurious, beautiful singer that then is capturing the attention of the tourists that attend Las Vegas. And the artists also attract a lot of tourists to Vegas, and it's sitting in that third house, ninth house axis. Venus, being the ruler of the moon, is in Aries and very close to the midheaven. So, again, emphasizing the foreign connection. And it's kind of funny because when we go to Vegas, I always feel like money can like just disappear and run really quickly. And we have Venus in Aries, which is quick, right? So um maybe we run through money like quickly, like it's out of our pockets quickly because of what we're doing with the money there. I mean, there's just not just gambling, there's just a lot of things to do in Vegas. There's shows, there's food, there's buffets. I mean, the amount of things that you can do in Vegas, you can really spend a lot of money in just a matter of hours. So I find this chart really interesting that it attracts so much money and so much power to the city itself. Another thing I noticed is Saturn is conjunct the South Node. So Vegas is also having a maturation phase with this transit because it's having 3 Saturn returns. As we speak, Saturn is getting ready to station direct. So it's going to form the third Saturn return. And Saturn, although he's known to be the bad guy, actually, when it comes to business, because Saturn rules the 10th house, naturally, he can bring a lot of wealth. And this is through dedicated work. So we're seeing that Vegas has been strategizing and planning for a very long time to add sports, even though it's always had a connection to sports because a lot of people would bet and, place bets, especially horse racing, which is very interesting here because Mars is opposing Jupiter. Jupiter rules horses. Either way, and Mars rules sports. But there was a lot of sports bets already in Vegas. That's been a thing, but the city of Vegas didn't actually have a stadium. It didn't have a team, and slowly in the last years, it's been um, adding those things to the city. It created a stadium. Um, it has sports teams that are now part of Las Vegas, and that's also generating a lot of money to the city itself. And I recently went to Vegas for a little mini staycation, and I mean, it was crazy. The traffic was so crazy because everything was being rerouted so they can get Formula 1 ready. So the entire city is rerouting everything. And yeah, it was just crazy. The traffic to get to like one place to the other. But it looked very nice what I saw, how it was being set up. So I'm excited to see the finished outcome of how the city of Vegas looks. Now, this is the chart of the Formula 1 race when it starts in Vegas. And I'm sure they're using an astrologer because of the way that everything is positioned. It's just like too much of a coincidence. There's just no way they're not using an astrologer. They're also having the race start at a very awkward time. So it's at night. And I mean, us astrologers here, we know there's times that the planets align and you're like, I need to launch this project, or when you're doing a reading for a client and they're trying to launch a business or concrete a partnership or something like that, you give them the time, the auspicious time, and sometimes it's like at 3 in the morning. And um that's very hard to do. Back in the days, registering a business at 3 in the morning would be something that it's near impossible. But nowadays you can, because you can just jump online and submit the application online, unless the site's down. Other than that, you can do it. So it's much more easier to do like some of those elections, like to perform some of those elections without those constraints that we had before of having them done between 8 to 5, the normal business hours. But like I sat with this chart and I'm like, why is it that they're doing this at night? I mean, they can do the race anytime. And I mean, they already closed down so many roads, so it's not like if it's going to affect business, it's making money for them. It's not affecting business. It's not a hot time during this time of the year in Vegas. It's actually really cold around that time. So I'm like, huh. And there's just no way an astrologer assisted with this because there's just duplication of energy. And let's go to the chart that shows the synastry of both the city of Las Vegas and the day that the Formula 1 race happens in Vegas. Now, it's not the first day of the Formula 1 race because Formula 1 race is hosted around the world. So this is actually one of the last races of the Formula 1 race of 2023, but it is a very significant one because it just shows how it's generating so much popularity and so much money for the city, and how it's very beneficial for the drivers that are going to be participating in the race. So the first thing that we notice is that there's a duplication of ascendant and it's very close. We also notice that Venus is conjunct the natal moon of the city. And the most significant one was the Sun, Cazimi, Mars. And this is very close to their natal Mars placement. It's also making an opposition to the city's Sun and the city's Jupiter. Jupiter is also up there, so they're about to have a Jupiter return. I kind of think they had a Jupiter return, so they're probably going to have 3 of them. I didn't check for that. I don't know if Emma did. Emma, did you end up checking?
Yeah, they're gonna have 3 Jupiter returns. They already had 2. They're gonna have when Jupiter goes direct again, they're gonna have the 3rd Jupiter return.
Wow. So that's another activation there. Anything you've noticed?
So I did some digging also because, like you, I was convinced that they have an astrologer because the charts, the synastry between those 2 charts are just mind blowing. So I found out that usually Formula 1 races are usually on Sundays. This one is happening on a Saturday. It's the first time they're hosting a race, the actual race, on a Saturday in over 40 years. And they have they have some races at night, but not a lot. They probably have 2 or 3 races at night, but this one is the latest race start time ever. So they've never held a race at 10 p.m. local time like the one they're having in Vegas. So for sure they have an astrologer because what are the odds?
Yeah, and it makes no sense since a lot of the viewers, I mean, they're around the world, and having a race at 10 p.m. means that they might even have to see the race like at 1, 2, 3 in the morning because
Yeah,
they're behind us and we're
yeah,
ahead of them. I'm saying we because I'm in Pacific Standard Time, just like Vegas, even though I'm not in Vegas. But I mean, Emma's in Florida, so she's 3 hours ahead of me. And when we coordinate to record these podcasts, we're like, okay, so this time is this time for you, and this time is that time for me. So we have to be very, like, mindful of what time we meet up. And pretty much I need to do it earlier so it's not too late for her. And them hosting it this late, I mean, it's even later for like the East Coasters,
yeah. For
people
the
in
East Coast, it's
Europe.
1 a.m.
Yeah, people in Europe. I mean, crazy. So, yes, for sure. I love that you found that. I mean, come on. The what is it? The proof is in the pudding. The the proof that they hardly do these races during night or this late. When's the latest? Like 8 o'clock? that they've done it in the past. I mean, 10 o'clock is just like crazy.
I'm not exactly sure because again, I think when they do those late night races, it's like in other parts of the world. So then when we watch it here in the US, it's already like a different time for us. So I'm not sure what the time is for them when they do it, but they have like only 2 or 3 races at those times. Not all of them. Most of them are during the day. And I think the other ones at night are like probably around 8 p.m. local time of the race.
Wow. Crazy. Yeah, so I'm sure this race is going to generate a lot of money for the city of Vegas, and it's going to also reach internationally. Why? Because we have the North Node conjunct Vegas MC with Venus, and that's where Vegas Mercury sits as well. So there's just no way that they're not making money out of off this event. And they already secured, I know that they already secured to be a home city. So it doesn't stop just here. This is the first time that they enter into this contract. I mean, they've hosted races before, but they never secured to have continuous hosting. So as of now, they're officially hosting for, I think, the next couple of years. And I'm pretty sure they're going to negotiate to renew those terms, once they see their $1 billion investment pay off, because they've spent a lot of money also getting ready for the race. But I'm sure, I mean, $1 billion isn't much for Vegas. Okay, so now let's move on to the players, and this is all Emma's area. So I'm gonna let her take over and explain this to you because she got in really deep Mars research on all the players.
Okay, so the first driver we're going to look at is Max Verstappen. He was born on September 30th, 1997 at 1:20 p.m. He
Mhm.
has his chart is an A rating, so his time of birth is pretty accurate. He's Dutch Belgium, but he drives under the Dutch flag. So Max is a Sag rising with Mars and Pluto closely conjunct on his rising. And earlier, we talked about Mars being the co-ruler of Scorpio with Pluto.
Yes.
And yeah, and Mars being that powerful drive and ambition and competitiveness, especially for sports players. We always look at their Mars and how prominent it is in their chart. And with them, it's conjunct Pluto. So it gives off this energy of like the daredevil, right?
Yeah.
That guy who's always pushing things to the limit and always wanting to be the best at something.
Yes, a very driven personality. So that sports Mars archetype is really connected to his chart. It's right on his rising.
Yeah, and he's also a Libra sun conjunct his midheaven. And with the sun conjunct and the midheaven, it's that need to be seen or leave a mark or legacy in whatever they do. And he is actually the youngest driver to not only participate in an F1 race, but also to win an F1 race. So he's really on his way to leave a legacy in Formula One. Right now, he actually won 3 world championship, and he replaced the Lewis Hamilton, who won for 7 years. He's the one replacing Lewis Hamilton currently, and he's the one winning mostly every race, especially this season.
Wow. I mean, you can really see that with his sun, because even the Mars and Pluto have a sextile going on with his sun. And he has something really unique that you don't see this often, but the midheaven is also sextiling his ascendant. So he takes his career very serious. I mean, Mars is serious business, so is Pluto, and it's aspecting his sun, which is an indicator of career, and his midheaven. Like, he is no joke dedicated to leaving a mark based on what he does, like his profession. So interesting that this intense
Right.
personality ended up in an F1 racing.
Yeah, and Lewis Ham in the Netflix show, I remember Lewis Hamilton saying something about him. He said, "I think Max pushes it to the limit and probably beyond." And we literally see that in his chart.
Yes, I mean, there is no more pushing to the limit than having Mars on the ascendant. And one thing that I want to add before we go on to his sponsor, because he drives for Red Bull, which is another interesting chart. Um, he was born during the time where Antares was rising, and that also is a very strong indicator of a personality that is very determined. Antares is the eye of the scorpion. So people that were born with planets on Antares or Antares on one of the pivotal points in the chart, like the angular points, they usually have this obsession, an obsession, obsessive personality. So they have this obsession to, in his case, achieve because it's his life path. So his life path is starting with this intensity, which can be a good thing, but it can probably also open up doors for other things that are like crises and traumas because it is a very intense energy. And like you mentioned about Netflix mentioning that he's such a daredevil, I mean, you see that signature, plus he has planets in Scorpio. So, I mean, I wouldn't see anything or expect anything less in his personality, honestly. Okay, let's move on to his sponsor. So he drives for Red Bull, and I used the sun chart for his sponsor because we don't know exactly when Red Bull was established, but we know the day. So when we don't have the exact time, I like to put the sun in like on the midheaven, especially for businesses, because that's what businesses are known for. It's more through their midheaven versus the rising. The rising does express a portion of the business, but the midheaven is like the legacy. Like we know Bull is leaving a legacy that they are an energy drink company, right? So businesses are more important to have that sun on top. Either way, the business chart was really interesting because it was established during a eclipse, actually right after the eclipse, and it's a very powerful chart because we also have the moon being born. And this is after the eclipse. This is a new moon, when that crescent moon is in the sky, like just birthed. And it's an exalted moon, and it's also an exalted sun conjunct the north node, which is the eclipse point, and conjunct Jupiter. So it's a very strong placement. And then we tie that into their logo. And Emma and I were talking about this, and then we were floored. Like, there's no way they did not use an astrologer because of the logo really literally representing the day that they established their chart. And we talked about how the energy of Taurus is the bull, and then the sun in Aries that rules red, and this is Red Bull. And then there's this like circle behind it, and it's the yellow. So it could be interpreted as the sun. It could also be interpreted as the moon. So it's like capturing both the essence of the sun and the moon because it doesn't have those typical rays like a sun would, yet the moon sometimes is this yellowish color. So you're just like, oh, so they really encompassed the day within the logo, and I'm pretty sure they thought out their whole branding around this. And I just thought that was crazy. It's amazing how companies can use a day and really establish their branding based on that day they select and be a successful company, because Red Bull is very successful. It's one of the youngest companies. All the other charts are going to have the sponsor charts, they're going to be older. They're going to establish more in the early 1900s for like Mercedes and the other card. The other sponsor, we're reviewing two other ones, but Red Bull's the youngest, if not the youngest, right, Emma?
Out of the other three, yes, but it's really interesting that they're the youngest and they're an Aries sun, and Aries is like the baby of the
Yes.
zodiac.
That's also another thing. Yeah, the baby of the zodiac. They're the baby of the sponsors. But I know you had shared something about Red Bull having this reputation of like,
Oh yeah, so they I think it was the director of Mercedes who made a comment about Red Bull, and they were like, Red Bull is a bit like the baby throwing their toys out of the stroller. You know when a baby throws that little temper tantrum? Well, he said that about Red Bull, and it's really interesting because that's what Aries is known for always like throwing a fit when things don't go their way, right? Or like the baby throwing their toys out of the stroller.
yes, yes. And even their Mars is in Taurus, which is really close to the moon, and Mars rules Aries. So it's just like, that fit. And when babies throw that fit, they're really like it's Aries energy, but how long is the fit gonna last? That's Taurus energy. Like that they can stay crying for hours and hours because there's babies that get happy really quick. So that's probably another expression of Red Bull because everyone knows them as throwing fits all the time. So it's like a stubborn energy, yet very childish too. Like yeah, so cool. Okay, so let's move on to the synastry of the player. We wanted to show you how some players are just meant to work or establish their career with the companies that they're working with. And with driving, it's very important because you have to depend on your sponsor. They're going to give you your car, they're going to give you your support, like your team that's with you, so you can be successful in driving. So they're really cheering you on and they really want you to do well for them because that's why they're sponsoring you. So when looking at Max's chart and comparing it to Red Bull's chart, the first thing I noticed was the sun conjunct the south node of Red Bull, meaning there is familiar energy that's aligning to what Max wants to leave behind as a legacy. And that was like extremely potent and strong there. Additionally, this is also making an opposition, like his Max's sun is making an opposition to Red Bull's Jupiter, triggering abundance. Because I'm sure he's made lots of money for Red Bull, vice versa. He's made lots of money off Red Bull, and that shows that abundance factor.
Yeah, definitely. And especially with that Sun Jupiter opposition, we see how together like they get to shine. And when Red Bull picked up Max pretty young as their driver, this is when he really started to show what he was capable of doing as an F1 driver. This is when he started winning for the first time, and now with Red Bull he became world champion, and at a pretty young age too.
Like he became a celebrity. The MC is like the celebrity.
Yeah.
And then two, his North Node is conjunct Red Bull's midheaven. Now, that's not totally accurate because we don't have the time, like the exact time, but there's a planet there. Mercury's there. Mercury's not going to move. So even then, there's a connection to Mercury through the North Node and
South.
um oh yeah, South Node, sorry, through the South Node, and Mercury represents vehicles.
Yeah, and even Max's Mercury is making a trine to Red Bull's Mars, the Taurus energy that Red Bull has.
Oh yeah, and that's an exact one. That's
Yeah.
an exact trine. So you can see all the synchronicities that they have and how this shows that it would be a successful partnership. I mean, we can get more into it, but we have other drivers to discuss. So let's go into the next driver, which is Charles. So you can let us know about him.
Okay, so Charles Leclerc was born on October 16, 1997 in Monaco at 9:25 a.m. And his chart is a double A rating, so again, very, very accurate. Um, he's a Scorpio rising, and he also has that Mars and Pluto conjunction like Max had. It's a little bit off. They were born, I believe, like 2 weeks apart, so that conjunction is still there, a little bit separating, but as a Scorpio rising, it is the ruler of his chart. So again, that Mars Pluto combination of the daredevil energy, if you will, is still very much potent in his chart.
Yeah.
He is, yeah, he's also a Libra sun, and he was born under a full moon. He has his moon in Aries, a Mars ruled sign again. So that Mars energy is very strong in his chart. That competitiveness is still very strong in his chart. And if you look at his sun at the 22 degree, according to the degree theory, it's that ultimatum degree. Usually with that 22 degrees, people are exposed to dangerous situations, if you will. And I mean, Formula 1 is a very dangerous sport, if not one of the most dangerous sports out there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, his chart is very interesting also.
Yeah.
What
Having to make a decision in a situation where it's life threatening, and I feel like he finds this thrilling, because I mean, getting behind that car, I think most drivers know there's a possibility that something not so pleasant can happen, and maybe that fuels him, like it's a thing that, like, revs his engine, like, yeah. Let's get in the car and let's see what happens. It's like playing with danger, that 22-degree ultimatum. Like, he places himself in a lot of situations, or he might has to make these decisions, and he responds well to crisis. I feel like that degree responds well to crisis.
Yeah, definitely. And he also lost his godfather, who was an F1 racer. He died. His name was Jules Bianchi. He died in an accident. I believe it was in 2014 or 2015. So he died on a racetrack, and I think he also lost his father. But his father was a race car driver, but I think he passed away pretty young, around, I think it was in his 50s, of cancer. So you can see with the sun at 22 degrees and also in the 12th house how he is, exposed to this situation where there's always danger or loss.
Yeah. And I mean, that Saturn really, it has hard aspects. Saturn is making a conjunction, not too close, but a conjunction to the moon, showing that, the early loss of a father figure affected his emotions and even the household, because the moon represents the household. So maybe like growing up quicker. And then the opposition to the sun also in the 12th house. So like triggering, past, like, traumas. The 12th house is all the things that we're not really aware of that we carry with us. So maybe, as he was younger, he didn't really necessarily acknowledge that these painful situations were like such a burden on him. But because Saturn is like pulling the energy to like mature from them, grow from them. But then there's an outlet for Saturn. That's the only trine he has. Like, he has a lot of squares and oppositions in his chart. And the only trine that he has is Saturn trining Mars. And Mars is a friend. Saturn finds Mars a friend. Mars does not find Saturn a friend. So whenever we see this combination, there is some like rebellious energy connected to it with people in authority, or people that had authority over you, and a father always has authority. Yet there's still also a cooperative energy here, because it's a trine, and Mars gets to be expressing a side of him that he rules, because actually this Mars rules his Saturn. Saturn's traveling in this chart the sign of Aries, so it's transiting that area, and that's Saturn's territory. So even though Saturn's in Sagittarius, it gets to have some of the Aries energy where, you just keep going. Like a kid that falls, scrapes his knees, and then gets up and dusts himself off and keeps running. Like, it gives them that fuel to keep going in these like situations that you mentioned that are pretty painful, but it hasn't stopped them.
Yeah, definitely.
Now let's go to Ferrari, because that's who he drives for. So Ferrari, I use the noon chart because of the fact that I don't have the time that it was established, but I have the day. So based on 12 a PM. This is the outline, and they happen to be a Virgo company, and actually Virgo new moon with a lot of planets in the sign of Virgo. Mercury in Virgo, so it's not a surprise that they decided to have a race car and a very um you know luxurious type of race car too, because there has so many planets there, and Virgo um being a sign that is ruled by Mercury has a connection to cars. And I know one of Ferrari's obsession is perfecting the engine. And you see that connection with Mars in an earth sign, because Mars rules engines, Mercury rules cars, and you see that Mars is making a trine to Venus, to Neptune, applying trine to the sun as well and the moon. It's far from Mercury, but eventually, as the energy of the chart progresses, it'll make a trine as well. And then there's also other planets in Taurus, so they have a grand Earth trine, which I find that fascinating because I know that that's one of their obsessions. Like they needed to make the fastest engine, and also the more reliable one. Like it's not just about a speed if your engine's breaking apart. Like they wanted to have a real big reliable engine that was the most powerful, which just shows all that earth energy like coming through. So I thought that was interesting. Let me move to the synastry chart of the driver and Ferrari, because Charles drives for Ferrari.
Yeah, and again, you see that connection with the nodes. This is actually a pattern that we found in most drivers and the company that they drive for, the nodes connecting with the player's chart.
Yes. I mean, this is like almost to the minute. Like Ferrari's, you can say Virgo stellium, new moon Virgo stellium, right on his north node. So that's catapulting him to like achieve what he set out to do in this life, because the nodes talk about our destiny. So having all that energy from the company coming in and just like triggering that north node for him just like really set him up. And I know you had told me something
Yeah, about his godfather was supposed to I'm not sure if he was supposed to drive for Ferrari or his dream was to drive for Ferrari. So when Ferrari signed Charles, he dedicated like in honor of his godfather, like his drive for Ferrari was dedicated to like in honor of his godfather because he wasn't able to do it, so he's gonna do it for him.
yes, I thought that was like the coolest
Yeah,
thing. It's just like a dream come true, and Neptune's involved. So
right.
like, and Neptune's the one closest. Well, no, the moon and everything's pretty much close to the north, his north node. Like made a dream of his come true. And that's probably what also brought him a lot of peace with working with Ferrari, like something fulfilled, something that's destined. Another thing that we noticed is that his sun at 22 degrees is really close to Ferrari's north node. So although he benefits a lot from Ferrari's energy, the company's also benefiting a lot from his energy too. So it's not just a one-way exchange, it's a two-way exchange.
Yeah.
And lastly, I know you talked about that dream, but I just noticed this right now. Look at Ferrari's
Yeah,
Mars.
yeah, I had seen it and I forgot to mention it. Yeah, the Ferrari's Mars on Charles Neptune, like making a dream a reality.
Yes, yes. Especially in that Capricorn energy, because we already know Capricorn really has the representation of keeping your eye on the prize and strategically climbing the mountain until you get to the top, even though there might be times that you slip back or you need rest or you need to start over. Like the mountain go still keeps going. So it just shows, like no matter what, like this dream that he's had, like he was going to go after it no matter what. And this company aligned to fulfill it for him. So he also has I mean, again, we don't know how accurate this is because based on the ascendant, like for the company, is not like we can't rely on it, but he has his Pluto, Venus, and Mars making a trine to the company's Jupiter in Aries. So I found that interesting too, because Jupiter rules Sagittarius. So then his little stellium that he has of those intense planets right there,
Yeah.
they get like a connection to the Aries archetype through Jupiter lenses, which is the ruler of where these planets are placed. So it just really works. I feel like he has way more connections to his company than Max did.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Yeah.
mhm. And then we can move into the next player or driver.
All right. So our next driver is Lewis Hamilton. He was born January 7th of 1985. He's from the UK. His time that we have is 3:30 a.m., but it's a double D rating, so it's not 100% accurate. So even though it shows with that time he's a Scorpio rising, we're not going to use that because it's not, again, 100% accurate. But he is a Capricorn sun at 16 degrees of Capricorn, also with a moon in Cancer, also born under a full moon. But he also has his sun conjunct Jupiter at 22 degrees. Again, we see that play with that 22 degrees of danger, playing with danger involved in this driver's chart. But him, though, looking at his Mars, he has his Mars in Pisces. Although it's not as prominent as Max or Charles Mars, it is making a trine to Pluto in Scorpio. But he has his Mars in a water sign. Was very interesting because it shows more, and you can see that with his driving style as well. He's a lot more fluid when he's maneuvering a car, and he also relies more on his gut instincts with that Mars in Pisces.
Yeah, and in his chart, Jupiter is in Capricorn, and Jupiter rules Pisces along with Neptune, but Jupiter is the ancient ruler of Pisces, and Neptune happens to be in Capricorn as well. But that assists Mars because Mars is exalted in the sign of Capricorn. So through his intuition, he's able to really execute Mars, and then it's already making a trine to Pluto, which is the other ruler of Scorpio. So Mars gets like a connection to Scorpio as well. And Saturn is in Scorpio, which is the ruler of the Jupiter. So it's like really well connected all throughout his chart. And that's funny. I wanted to mention one thing when you said he was also born during a full moon, and usually full moon babies they're called lunatics. First, they're very emotional people. I'm one of them. I am a full moon baby and I love it. But I can be all over the place. So I just found that funny. I wanted to go back and look at Max's moon. I was like, where does he have his moon? I don't remember if he was he born under a full moon as well or no?
Max, no, he has his moon in Virgo.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So these guys have the lunatic, the last two, the lunatic signature, but not the first one. Yeah, I thought that was cool. Which I mean, that can show also part of that daring personality, right? Like they don't care, like, oh, that's crazy. Are you gonna do that? That's crazy. Why are you doing that? And they're like, I don't care. I'm doing it.
Exactly.
Daredevil. Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's move on to Mercedes, which is his sponsor. Now, Mercedes is more complicated as a company because it's merged a lot. So, based on this chart, this is like the date that I felt the best, like the more comfortable to use when we're talking about Mercedes now, but Mercedes partnered with Mercedes Benz and all that. So this company has been merging a lot. So, based on the noon chart, We have a sun in Cancer and Pluto in Cancer and the North Node again. Like you find the signature of these companies really, really, really wanting to establish a business with destiny points. And this company was also established during an eclipse. It was actually a lunar eclipse after it. The same thing like Red Bull. Red Bull was during a solar eclipse after it. So like a day after or a day or two. The same thing with Mercedes, but they're using the lunar eclipse. And what I find most interesting, I mean, about Mercedes compared to the other sponsors is that Mercedes is also a home brand. I mean, not everyone has a Mercedes, but we do see a lot of people having a Mercedes in their driveway more than a Ferrari, right? So you can see that connection to Cancer because that's the energy of home. That's the energy of like having a vehicle parked in your home, and it's also a Mercury in Cancer. So I just found out like found that so literal to their brand because they did become a household brand as well, not just on the racetrack. And it's more affluent. I mean, they do cost a pretty penny, but they're not as expensive as a Ferrari. And also I think they're more practical because Ferrari's design, they don't care. They just want powerful, fast engines. And Mercedes is like, I want powerful, fast engines too, but I also want to make a line of cars that's more practical. So I found that interesting. They
And
have a
they're
Mhm.
no, they're Venus in Taurus. So even though it is more affordable than the other car, it still has that luxury with that Taurus, that Venus and Taurus energy.
Exactly. Exactly. That very dreamy quality. And yeah. And they incorporate technology in their stuff too. So you see the Aquarius, like I feel like Mercedes have always been ahead of the game. So an example, like when they release a car this year, the technology that Mercedes has compared to technology of that same release year car to other brands is way more advanced. And you see that too with the Venus connection to Jupiter, because Jupiter and the moon are in Aquarius. So there's like a different like expression. They really use innovation in their design. And that's why a lot of people started liking Mercedes because you'll get two cars that were released from different companies, but Mercedes was like way more futuristic. It had like way more like kinks and things like that, and like an upgrade of sorts, right? So that's why they were able to be so successful because they're utilizing a lot of these points that they have in their chart to really establish their name and produce a car that matches the energy that they chose to go with. And lastly, they have Mars in Aries, so that also shows a very good engine. Mars rules the sign of Aries, and Mars is connected to engines. And I think Mercedes have this reputation. I mean, at least this is what my dad told me. um, like they also have a Saturn in Scorpio, which is the other energy of Aries, not Aries, Mars. Mars rules Scorpio as well. And my dad would always say, oh, Mercedes are really good for their engine and they hardly break down. But when they do break down, it does cost a pretty penny because of the way that their engine is. A lot of the parts may be pricey, but they can last forever. And I remember him telling me this over and over, like they last forever. Those are good quality cars. And I honestly see way more older Mercedes than any other car out there. Like compared to other brands, like I'll see that car as the oldest that's still out there driving. And I mean that proves that theory. And Saturn is old, right? And it also appeals a more mature crowd. I mean, I think some of us want to have a Mercedes when we're young, but it's not really a possibility when you're setting yourself up in your career. So as you get older, you get a Mercedes. I mean, I haven't gotten one yet, so okay, let's go ahead and move on to the synastry of the driver and the sponsor.
Yeah, okay. So with Lewis Hamilton, we see again that nodal connection. We see the Mercedes nodes at 16 degrees of Capricorn and Cancer conjunct Lewis's 16 degrees Capricorn Sun, and also Lewis's Jupiter.
Yes.
And looking also at Lewis's nodes, we see the connection with Mercedes Venus at 29 degrees of Taurus. It's not exact, but it's still closely conjunct. And with Lewis being part of Mercedes, Mercedes was able to win the Constructors' Championship 8 times. So again, we see that connection with making money, not just the player, but also for the team.
For the company. Yeah, and also the nodal connection on the north node with Lewis's moon. Like new beginnings for the company as well. And wasn't he the one that you mentioned that he's won like X
Yeah,
amount?
he won 7 times the world championship. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, come on, to win 7 times, he's generated a lot of money through the company and for the company. So that's also pretty crazy right there. And another thing that I noticed is the part of fortune. So the part of fortune is the calculation between the sun, moon, and the ascendant. So it's not going to be super accurate with Mercedes, but just based on placing the sun in the noon chart, which is the noon position, which is very important for companies, just from that perspective, they're still really close. Like you see a part of fortune at 7 degrees for the company conjunct his part of fortune. So that it's also bringing him money. It's the energy of Taurus. It falls in his 6th house. So it's through the work that he does. It's not like they're just like handing him out cash. He's working really like ethically, really hard, just like a good Capricorn would for the money.
It's interesting that you said that. I remember watching the documentary and Lewis said, all my life, I know that if I worked hard enough, I would be able to achieve great things. And just saying that, like the word achieve and work hard enough, that's such like a Capricorn energy.
Yes, yes. And then having that connection to the South Node and Mercedes, it just made it much more easier to really trigger that energy that he already carried with him, right? It's like this felt familiar for him. I can achieve because this is my vibration. I can achieve through working with this company, partnering with this company. Yeah. And it happens to be that Mercedes's Venus falls really close to his his north node, like you mentioned, but it's in the 7th house of contracts and partnering.
Right.
So, and his part of fortune, because that's his, right? Yeah, that's his part of fortune is right on his 7th house cusp, showing that he will be, or he'll activate his success through partnering, through entering professions where he can sign a contract and have an agreement, and that can generate him money, stability, wealth. So very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, cool. Now we can move past the drivers. We just wanted to show you some of the things that we've noticed with the drivers and some signatures that we see like often. But in doing our research, and we've researched a lot more players, and not just for racing, but Emma and I got into the World Cup, and we actually decided to do this series based on our just like friendly conversations we were having back and forth on the World Cup and the players. And what we started to notice is that a lot of players, we're not saying all of them, but we saw a big majority of players that become very obsessed with their craft end up having Mars in water signs or Mars in a water house, traditionally in a water house. So an example, let me go back to this chart. The 4th house is traditionally a water house. So is the 8th house, and so is the 12th house. But in Mercedes's chart, it happens to be earth energy. But no matter what, the underneath agenda of this house is still always going to be water, even though it's painted earth. Even though the water needs to be acting more grounding or whatever, it's still going to be water and connected to that water energy. So we notice that the players either have their Mars in water houses, even if it's not the same water sign, or they have a water sign Mars. And I mean, when it comes down to sports, I feel like sportsmen use their intuition a lot. And that's what water is. Water has that connection to intuition, right, Emma?
Yeah, definitely. Their intuition, but also like that gut instinct.
Mm-hmm. Like in a matter of seconds, because Mars is quick. In the archetype of Aries, he reacts. Like he doesn't have to think. Like the way that he processes things, it's like in milliseconds. Like checking the environment and reacting. The energy of Scorpio is much more methodical, much more thought out, but no matter what, it's also instinct and reactive. So that's why we found it interesting that a lot of the sportsmen happen to have the water. And one of them that was very surprising for us is Mars in Cancer, because Mars technically is debilitated in the sign of Cancer. Now, I have planets in debilitation and I also have planets in exaltation in my chart. And I feel like my greatest gifts, or where I've unlocked a lot of abundance, is through my debilitated planet. And it could become an obsession because it's like someone telling you you cannot do it, and then you're like, watch me do it. So it can work that way too, or it can work where you become the victim of your label and you're like, oh yeah, well, I'm never gonna do that, so I guess I'm never gonna do it. So I see both, but that's where we have the free will to change it and really evolve, because no matter what, we have a planet in an area that doesn't function as well, it's reflecting the area that it functions well in. That's how astrology works. So Mars in Cancer is debilitated, yet Mars in Capricorn, which is the opposite sign of Cancer, is exalted. So that means if Mars looks in the mirror or looks at his reflection using the water energy, because water rules reflection and looking on the mirror, then it can really learn to embody the other sign. Now, is it always going to be like, is it going to be Mars and Capricorn eventually? No, it executes a lot of effort to metamorphic change, but no matter what, it can do it because it has a connection, it has a reflection. Eventually needs to retreat back to the energy of Cancer and be more instinctual and use more of that water energy to regenerate its vitality, but it can have access to the other side. The other Mars in Pisces, the same thing. It could go to the earth sign Virgo, which becomes very intense and meticulous, and Mars can handle that. Yeah, and the other one, what's the other water sign?
Scorpio.
Scorpio, which is in rulership. So I mean, there you go. Why there's this connection of Mars and the water signs, and why these sportsmen just have like this tenacity to keep going. And lastly, what I wanted to mention before you chime in with anything else is that even though we can say Mars is debilitated in Cancer, I mean, some of the greatest chefs are men. And I mean, the kitchen can be a dangerous environment, as Chef Ramsay has shown us. You can get burned in the kitchen, but in the kitchen, there's also knives. So, yeah, maybe it's not the ideal situation. Mars is not out there in a battle, but in the kitchen, he gets to master his craft too with knives. So, there's function to your debilitated planets wherever they're at. And I think that's where that obsession comes through, because Mars in Cancer, especially for a man, I feel like they need to prove their Martian qualities. Like there's something instinctually within them, like that they have to improve their Mars. So I feel like that's how that obsession comes about, and why we see so many men that have Mars in Cancer in sports.
Yeah, I mean, classic example is Leo Messi. He has his Mars in Cancer. And yeah, I mean, he's one of the greatest players in soccer. You know, we call him the GOAT, the GOAT. So Another
Yes.
one is with Mars in Pisces is LeBron James
Yes.
again. So
He's also the GOAT. I mean, he also has the sun in Capricorn. So I mean, come on. He's gonna have to be the goat somehow. But the goat has a water connection. It's actually a water goat. It has a tail, just like a fish tail. So that's also interesting there. Like
yeah, and
it, mhm.
just in Formula 1, there were also, besides Lewis Hamilton, I think there were the 3 or 4 other drivers that I saw with water Mars.
Yeah, yeah. And going back to what you said about Messi, he's one of the best soccer players, and I mean he led the team to win the World Cup. But he's also such a homebody. He's like so vested in being a good father and a good husband, and that's the energy of Cancer. Yet you can see his personality. I mean, when we were watching the World Cup, you can see when he would get mad, he was talking shit. Like like it's not like he's all kind cancery out there, playing
Yeah,
ball.
but he also has Mars square Jupiter in Aries. So again,
Oh,
Jupiter like aggravates, it enhances that like Mars energy.
exactly. Yeah. So we had a ball putting this together for you. And hopefully if you enjoyed it, you can leave us a comment and let us know. We'd like to make more videos like this and also make other videos about things that are happening, and just analyzing them through the lens of astrology. So if you like this, please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and we will answer all your comments. Anything that you let us know, we'll be attentive to the comments.
Yeah, this was really fun. Thank you, Chris, for joining me on this. And yeah, whatever topic, we're open to hearing any topic you would like us to discuss or look at it through the lens of astrology.
Yes. So this is it for this episode of the Cosmic Hour. Thank you so much, and hope to see you soon in the next episode where me and Emma will decipher another astrology, either event or aspect. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.